My name is Wanru, and I'm from the JC ministry. I'm so glad to be given this opportunity to share my thoughts on spiritual revival today. Currently, I'm in JC2, and for those of you who have been to JC, you would know that it is an intense and horrific 2 years of just hardcore studying. Just like the young rich man who found it hard to part with his wealth, I found it hard to give up my studying time for God. In the beginning of this year, I downloaded the study app called Forest, which basically tracks how much time I spend on studying. It also has a feature that shows the number of hours that my friends are studying, ranking from the highest number of hours to the lowest. And I was so discouraged when I saw that my friends were all studying 8 hours to 10 hours, while I was clocking a mere 5 to 6 hours. I was almost always near the bottom of the ranking, and I felt like I wasn't putting in enough hours to study. So I started to think about what commitments or activities that I should cut down on, for example, spending time with friends or my quiet time, in order to make more time to study. So I rationalized that results were the most important thing in this present moment in JC, and everything else could wait until after A-levels were over. After all, good results would also glorify God as a student. But soon I felt very overwhelmed and anxious and uncertain about my future, and I finally decided to text Auntie Joyce Palmero about my struggles and asked her for advice. She was very encouraging, and she told me to just boldly ask God for a miracle and trust that He would deliver. That night, I told myself to surrender all things to God and put Him back as my top priority. I decided to make 3 changes. First, I restarted my Bible verse bank. This was a habit I had before, when I would just compile Bible verses of God's promises, especially those that reassure me that God will provide and He will light up my path if only I lean on His strength. I used to read through these verses in times of distress and uncertainty, especially before the start of exam season. I kind of forgot about it until June, but recently I started reading through these verses again, and each time I read about God's promises of His unwavering love for me, I'm filled with an inexplicable peace that only He can provide, and I'm reminded once again that God is my shepherd and He will always take care of me. Second, I decided to bring God into more aspects of my life. I always kind of kept church and school separate, and I never really discussed God with any of my school friends because I felt like they wouldn't be able to understand or relate to me. But recently, I started having deep spiritual talks with a close friend of mine from school who has just started attending church. Since I spend most of my time in school as compared to twice a week in church, talking about God in school was just so refreshing to me. The simple act of saying grace together helped our conversation be more God-centered instead of the more casual and worldly conversations we used to have. This was a personal revival for me because the enthusiasm that my friend and I shared reminded me of the time when I was baptized. Even as a mere 5-year-old disciple, which will probably seem very young to many of the older disciples here, my faith can be dry, and talking about my spiritual life with my friend reignited my excitement for God again. The third thing I changed was writing down what I was grateful for in my quiet time journal. Sometimes when I feel like I've drifted from God, or I can't feel Him working in my life anymore, writing these things down helped me feel the presence of God in my life again, just like what Uncle Wee Kyung preached yesterday about being emotionally connected to God and the Word. On a day that I hung out with a friend, I was grateful to God for putting such people in my life who have made me become a better person. On another day that I did a lot of chemistry, I thanked God for granting me the wisdom for understanding a particular concept. And for days that nothing much really happened, I just wrote down small things that made me smile. And when I go back and read these things that I was grateful for from a few months ago, I'm reminded of how much God cares for me and how He is, indeed, working in my life every single day. I would like to end off with a verse from my Bible verse bank Deuteronomy 31 verse 8 reads, "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged." Now, I am glad to share that I am less anxious and more at peace with God, even though I'm still ranked among the lowest in my Forest app. In fact, God still answered my bold prayers and helped me to do better in my studies than before. I have learned to live in the moment, trusting God, and knowing that His love will see me through my A-levels, which are starting in about a week's time. I don't want to be like the young man who walked away from God. Instead, I want to walk close to God, under His loving protection. I must admit that there are still times that I fool myself into thinking, oh, I can control my life alone. And I'm sure that as I grow older, there'll be more things to worry about. My career, finances, or perhaps who my parents' future son-in-law might be. But by staying rooted in God, wouldn't our achievements be all the more meaningful, since they are now a reflection of God's strength? With that, I hope my sharing has inspired us to find our own spiritual revival. Thank you.